My granddaughter slipped my ruby ring off my hand while hugging me goodbye. She smiled. I smiled back, but I wasn't blind. I was counting what left with her, counting what they thought I wouldn't notice. First the ring, then the pearl earrings. One day, even my favorite brooch gone. No questions, no accidents, just vanished from my drawers like smoke. I sat in that chair by the window and watched them think I was fading. Frail, forgetful, easy to fool. They didn't know I was sharper than ever. I didn't ask about the missing things, didn't scold, didn't cry. I just let the silence grow heavy around them. And I kept counting. They spoke soft when they thought I was sleeping, whispered about when it's time and getting things in order. I heard them, every word. I remember when I bought that ruby ring, saved for it for years. It was never just a jewel. It was my fire. Now they wore it like it was theirs. Like I didn't still breathe and bleed in that same house. But I wasn't broken. I was watching, learning. I saw who unlocked drawers, who asked questions about my will, who brought me soup but stared at the cabinet where the cash box used to be. Number. I wasn't confused. I was calculating. They thought I'd crumble. They thought time made me soft. But I had lived through wars, deaths, and a husband who once emptied our savings and left me to rebuild. I knew how to lose, and I knew how to win. Quiet. So I counted. Not just the jewelry. I counted their visits, their words, their hands in my things. And when the time came, I didn't shout. I signed papers. I made calls. I changed names on deeds. They took my jewelry. I took their real estate. I married young. We didn't have much. Just a tiny house with thin walls and a leaky roof. But we had each other. And back then, that felt like enough. The children came fast. One, then another, then another. Little mouths to feed. Tiny hands reaching up. And every time one was born, I promised myself they'd have more than I ever did. That was my vow. My quiet oath. I worked nights sewing hems for the neighbor ladies. My husband worked days at the mill. On Sundays, I'd count the coins we saved in the jar under the sink. I never complained. When my eldest needed braces, I sold a bracelet my mother gave me on my wedding day. It was gold, delicate. I remember running my fingers over its links before letting it go. But his teeth straightened and he smiled wide in every school photo after. That was enough for me. When college letters arrived, I opened my jewelry box again. The pearl earrings I wore on my 40th birthday. The necklace my husband surprised me with one Christmas, after his first big bonus. All gone. Each piece bought them books, tuition, apartments near campus. I didn't cry as I handed them over at the pawn shop. I gave. I waited. I clapped for them from the shadows. They married, started their own families, bought homes with guest rooms they never invited me to stay in. Grandchildren came. At first, they'd sit on my lap, sticky fingers in my hair, laughter filling my quiet house again. But as they grew, visits got shorter. Phone calls came less often. Text messages with quick love yous, but no time to chat. I kept the fridge full of their favorite things. The strawberry jam, the lemon cake. Sometimes they didn't even open the fridge before they left. But still, I gave. I waited. I clapped for them from the shadows. When my husband got sick, I nursed him quietly. Day after day, I spooned soup into his mouth, changed his sheets, wiped his forehead while they promised to visit next weekend. After he passed, they hugged me at the funeral. And then they left me in this too-big house full of empty rooms and fading laughter. I still cooked dinner for one. I still set the table for two. Out of habit, I suppose. The house grew colder, but my love didn't. I saved birthdays on the calendar. I mailed cards with crisp bills folded inside. I crocheted blankets they never picked up. I made offers to babysit they never accepted. But still, I gave. I waited. I clapped for them from the shadows. And when they did come, they always left with something small. A vase here, an old watch there. You don't need this anymore, do you, Grandma? Always with a smile. Always with soft hands touching my things. I smiled too. Let them take. Let them believe I was too old to care. Because I knew their hearts had drifted somewhere I couldn't reach. Somewhere busy and bright and full of newer, younger voices. But I remembered every sacrifice, every piece of gold, every sleepless night, every meal I skipped so they could eat seconds. I gave. I waited. I clapped for them from the shadows. And now they counted on my silence. They thought my giving had no end. But every well runs dry. Even mine. The visits grew shorter. Quick hellos and quicker goodbyes. I'd watch their cars pull into the driveway, engines still running. Hugs became polite, light, as if I might crumble under the weight of their arms. I kept baking the pies they once begged for. Apple, cherry, lemon meringue. But most went untouched, wrapped in foil, and left behind on the counter. "We're trying to eat healthy, Nana," they'd say, reaching for their keys before their tea turned cold. Phone calls shifted too. At first, they'd last an hour, then 20 minutes, then a few hurried minutes while they shuffled between meetings, soccer practice, dinners with friends. "We'll talk soon, okay?" they'd promise. I clung to the sound of their voices long after the dial tone hummed in my ear. Then the question started. Soft, careful. "Nana, you still keep everything in the safe, right? You know it's safer in a bank these days." I'd smile and nod, my hands folded on my lap. Then, another time, "Do you still remember your online banking password? Maybe we should write it down, just in case." Their voices were sweet, their words wrapped in concern. But I heard what they weren't saying. My eldest granddaughter brought me a scarf one afternoon, pink with tiny embroidered flowers. "To brighten you up, Nana," she said, tying it gently around my neck. But her eyes flickered to my jewelry box. "That necklace doesn't really go with much anymore, does it?" she whispered almost playfully. My fingers touched the locket resting on my chest, the one with my husband's photo inside. I smiled. She smiled. But our smiles weren't the same. I told myself they cared. Of course they cared. They were busy, that's all. Young people have busy lives. I told myself that over and over, the way a mother tells herself bedtime stories to fall asleep. But care doesn't calculate what's left to take. Care doesn't measure how many more holidays I might have. Care doesn't study my jewelry box like a catalog. There were more questions. About the house. About the deed. About what would happen someday. "It's just good to be prepared, Nana," they'd say, tilting their heads like kind nurses. "You don't want to leave a mess for us to figure out later, do you?" They always said, for us, not for me, for them, the future owners. I'd hear whispers in the kitchen when they thought I was resting. "If she downsizes, we could help her sell. She probably doesn't even remember what's in that safe. The market's good right now." Their voices low, urgent, slicing through the walls like knives. Still, I told myself they loved me. They hugged me. They kissed my cheek. They called me Nana. But their eyes weren't soft anymore. They were scanning, estimating, smiling wide while their fingers curled around invisible coins in the air. And I let them. Because I wanted to believe in the love I had built. I wanted to believe my sacrifices meant more than numbers on a deed. I sat quietly, watching their lips form careful words. I listened as they mapped my estate like it was already vacant. I smiled back, but inside, something colder began to settle. The same cold I felt years ago, when my husband drained our savings behind my back. That familiar, hollow chill of betrayal. I folded my hands tighter in my lap. My rings glinted under the soft light. They glanced at them like birds eyeing seeds. "You don't wear that ruby much anymore, Nana. Maybe I could keep it safe for you?" My granddaughter's voice was honey. Her eyes were calculation. I told myself they cared. But care doesn't hover around your safe. Care doesn't plan for your absence while you're still breathing. And care doesn't slip rings off your hand when you pretend to nap. The smiles shifted. I saw it. I felt it. But I kept smiling too, because they thought I couldn't count. It happened so slowly, I almost believed it was nothing. At first, one ring missing. Then, a bracelet I hadn't worn in years. I told myself maybe I misplaced them. Maybe my hands had grown too shaky to remember where I'd set things down. But I knew better. My mind was still sharp, sharper than they wanted it to be. One afternoon, I went to check the safe. My hands knew the code like a prayer. The door opened with its usual soft click, but inside, nothing. The velvet box where my wedding pearls had always rested sat open, empty, like a mouth frozen in silent scream. The drawers were light. The papers were missing. Even the small gold locket from my husband gone like my voice at their dinners. My breath caught in my throat. Not panic, not confusion, just cold. I closed the safe and walked back to my chair. I sat there for hours, staring at the patterns on the carpet, listening to the clock tick. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to cry out of me. I let the silence press against my chest like a heavy blanket. They thought I wouldn't notice, but I counted. I had always counted. The phone rang later that day. My son's voice was too cheerful. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. How are you feeling today?" I could hear the hum of laughter behind him. His wife, my grandchildren, my empty jewelry safe. "Oh, I'm fine," I said softly, my voice steady enough to make him pause for half a second before rambling on about his busy schedule. "By the way," he added, "we've started organizing your finances, just to help you out. You don't need to worry about those things anymore." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. They had moved my accounts, changed passwords, left me locked out of my own money while telling me it was all for my comfort, my protection, my peace of mind. "You've always done so much for us," my daughter chimed in later. "It's time you let us take care of you now." Take care. That's what they called it. Weeks passed, and each visit felt more like inventory day. They glanced around my house, opening cabinets without asking. "Oh, you still have this old silver set? We should sell it before the value drops, Nana." My granddaughter stroked the lace on my dining table, the one I crocheted when I was pregnant with her mother. "These doilies are beautiful, Nana. But do you even use them anymore?" I sat there, hands folded, nodding, smiling. I knew the script by heart now. Every suggestion wrapped in soft voices. Every theft dressed up as kindness. I listened as they whispered about my memory fading, about how I repeated stories, about how I confused days. They spoke like I was already half gone. But I wasn't gone. I was watching them bury me while I was still breathing. They spoke around me, not to me. As if I were furniture. As if I couldn't hear the words dancing like knives. "It'll be easier if we just get ahead of the paperwork now. She's not as sharp as she used to be. It's better for her." The worst part wasn't the theft. Not the jewelry, not the money. It was the silence. The way they emptied my life piece by piece while patting my hand and calling it love. The way my voice disappeared from their dinners, my stories left half told, my seat at the table always a little further away from theirs. The safe was empty. The drawers were light. Even my wedding pearls gone like my voice at their dinners. But they forgot one thing. I was still counting. I sat in my chair, day after day, like they expected me to. Quiet, small, grateful. But behind my still hands, my mind was wide awake, watching, listening, counting. They thought I was fading. They thought I couldn't see the pattern. But I saw it all. Every glance toward my safe. Every whispered conversation. Every missing piece. And then one morning, I remembered something they had not. The papers. Not the jewelry. Not the cash they lifted one by one. The papers. The ones filed decades ago, tucked into old manila envelopes in the back of the hall closet. My husband never trusted banks with certain things. The house deed. The land we inherited. The small trust his uncle had left in my name. Not flashy, not glittering, but powerful. I waited until they were gone. Until the house was quiet. I walked to the closet slowly, one hand on the wall for balance. The box was still there. Under old quilts no one ever bothered to lift. I opened it and breathed in the scent of paper and time. Thick envelopes, stamped, signed, untouched. Title papers, property records, the trust documents. They were all still mine. They stole what glittered, They forgot what was written in ink. I started writing things down. Dates. Conversations. What was missing? What was said? Not in anger. In precision. I documented everything, page after page, in a small notebook they never saw. I slipped it under my mattress at night like a secret heartbeat. Then I made phone calls. Quiet calls. Old friends. People who still remembered me before my hair turned white. The notary who once handled my husband's estate. The attorney who helped us set up that small trust fund when the children were young. Some were retired, but they answered. They remembered. They cared in ways my own family no longer did. "Good to hear your voice again, Margaret," one of them said. "How can I help you?" I smiled into the receiver, my voice calm. "I just need a little advice. Quiet advice." They thought I was locked out of my accounts, and they were right for the ones they touched. But there were accounts they didn't know existed. Old accounts tied to properties long forgotten. Small plots of land purchased when my husband was still dreaming big. Assets sitting quietly, accumulating value while they circled my house like vultures. I reviewed everything. Slowly, carefully, reading every paper twice, 3 times. I asked questions, took notes, verified signatures. I wasn't fast, but I was thorough. That was my advantage. They moved quickly, grabbing what they could see. I moved slowly, securing what they had forgotten. The professionals I spoke with understood. They didn't ask questions they didn't need answers to. "Margaret," one of them said gently, "it's good you're doing this now, while everything is still yours." I smiled. It was still mine, and they didn't even realize. I watched my children and grandchildren during their visits, saw how they smiled, how they touched my arm like I was fragile glass. "You're lucky you don't have to worry about anything anymore, Nana," they'd say. I nodded, but I was worrying. Not out of fear, out of purpose. I counted what they forgot. The properties, the trusts, the little insurance policy tucked away under my maiden name. The joint account I once opened with my sister when we dreamed of opening a bakery. They thought they owned my life now. They thought they stripped me bare, but they never looked deep enough. I didn't tell them to stop visiting. I let them keep coming, let them believe they had won. Because while they took what glittered, I was taking back what was written in ink, quietly, patiently, counting every step. The lawyer sat across from me, his glasses low on his nose, papers spread out on my dining table. He spoke softly, carefully, like one speaks to someone fragile, but after a few minutes, his tone shifted. He saw what they hadn't, the clarity in my eyes, the steadiness in my voice. "Margaret," he said, sliding one of the folders closer to me, "these deeds, they're still in your name. Entirely. No transfers, no liens. They never touched these." I nodded. I never told them about these properties. They didn't think to ask. We reviewed each document slowly. The farmland my husband bought 40 years ago. The lake cabin we rented to strangers every summer. Even a small commercial lot downtown that had quietly appreciated over the decades. All of it still mine, untouched, waiting. "They focused on the shiny things," he said. "The easy grabs." "They always have," I answered, my voice steady, my hands calm. He helped me file the necessary papers. Trust adjustments, title confirmations, quiet legal steps that would ensure everything they thought was theirs would remain firmly in my hands. We filed to freeze the accounts they moved into their names. Legally. Permanently. He told me how rare it was to catch something like this before it went too far. "Most people don't act fast enough," he said. I smiled. I wasn't fast. I was watching. But they didn't stop. They sensed something changing. My son called more often. My granddaughter brought me more tea, stayed longer, her voice a little higher, her laughter forced. "Nana, remember? You signed that power of attorney form we brought last year? It's all handled. You don't need to worry." I remembered. Of course I remembered. They smiled when I signed the power of attorney. I smiled when I revoked it. I hadn't been tricked when I signed. I had been patient, waiting for them to believe they had full control. They moved quickly after that, certain I wouldn't fight back. But now, with my lawyer's help, That power of attorney was null. The filings were complete. The courts agreed I was competent, fully capable of managing my affairs. The documents spoke for themselves. They challenged my mind, claimed I was slipping. We sat before the judge and they spoke of my forgetfulness. They mentioned my age, my quiet mistakes. My granddaughter even dabbed her eye as she spoke. But when the judge asked me simple questions about my finances, about dates, about legal terms, I answered clearly, slowly, fully. The courtroom was quiet as my voice echoed, steady and precise. I saw my daughter's lips tighten. My son shifted in his chair. My granddaughter wouldn't meet my eyes. They hadn't prepared for me to be sharp. They had prepared for a woman who was broken. But I was never broken. I was calculating. One by one, their claims were denied. The court ruled the documents they manipulated were void. The accounts were frozen. The properties were fully restored to my name. The judge leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Harris, you appear quite capable of managing your own estate." I smiled softly. "Thank you, Your Honor." They sat frozen, like statues, as if the ground beneath them had quietly shifted and they didn't know where to place their feet. When we left the courthouse, my lawyer offered his arm. "You did beautifully," he said. "I told you," I whispered. "I've always been counting." They smiled when I signed the power of attorney. I smiled when I revoked it. I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors. I didn't demand apologies that would have only come wrapped in lies. I simply continued, quietly, precisely, like always. The properties sold faster than I expected. The farmland, the cabin, the commercial lot, downtown, each transaction sealed with quiet signatures and large checks. I watched the numbers climb in my new accounts, ones they didn't even know existed. I didn't tell them about the sales. I didn't need to. The jewelry they took, those small, glittering trophies they slipped into their pockets, became laughable in comparison. Let them keep the rings, the bracelets, the necklaces they whispered over. Let them think they won. They left with my gold. I left with their mortgages. With each sale, I felt lighter. Not angry. Not vengeful. Just free. Free from the weight of pretending. Free from the quiet humiliation they thought I hadn't felt. Every deposit was a soft victory. I cashed the quiet checks while they planned imaginary futures funded by things they no longer owned. They still visited, still brought me flowers and empty smiles, still spoke gently, as if I were a porcelain doll on a shelf they kept polished. "Nana, we should go over some of the paperwork again soon," my son would say, his voice honeyed. "Don't worry about all these confusing legal things. We've got you covered." I nodded, smiled, poured more tea. But my will had already been rewritten. The trust restructured. Their names removed, one by one, like dust wiped clean from a mirror. No meetings, no confrontations, no scenes. Just quiet ink on paper, witnessed, notarized, legal. Instead, I left the bulk of my estate to organizations that mattered to me. The local library that kept me company all these years. The women's shelter I volunteered at before my knees grew stiff. Scholarships for young women who worked hard and asked for nothing. Strangers who would never steal from me. People who would never call me a burden behind closed doors. They never saw it coming. Because they never really saw me. They saw what I could give. What they could take. But not me. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need their tears. I had my peace. And my quiet revenge. They left with my gold. I left with their mortgages. The flowers started arriving first. Expensive arrangements, too big for my small table. Orchids, lilies, roses, bright, desperate colors. Each bouquet came with a carefully written note. "We're sorry for the misunderstandings, Nana. Family is everything. Let's talk soon." Their words smelled sweeter than the flowers. But the air still carried the rot underneath. Then came the letters. Long, handwritten pages filled with soft regrets. My daughter's delicate script, my son's bold handwriting, my granddaughter's perfectly rounded letters like little pleading eyes on the page. They wrote of love, of confusion, of how they only wanted to protect me. "We didn't realize how this looked, Nana. We made mistakes, but we meant well. You mean the world to us." The same voices that once whispered about my fading mind now painted themselves as misunderstood caregivers. Extended family joined in too. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years, called curious at first, then concerned. "Surely you won't cut them off completely, Aunt Margaret," one said. "They're your blood," another sighed. "They made mistakes, yes. But haven't you always taught us to forgive?" I listened politely. I sipped my tea. I smiled. But I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Because they didn't know what I knew. They hadn't heard the careful plotting, the whispered calculations. They saw flowers. I saw hands reaching back for what had already slipped through their fingers. My lawyer received calls too. Subtle questions about whether my decisions could be reversed. Hints about my state of mind, my emotional health. He relayed the messages to me each week. "They're trying," he'd say, "but they have no legal ground." I nodded. "I know." They're not used to being told no. The gifts came too late. They hadn't brought flowers when my husband died. They hadn't written letters when I sat alone through holidays. They hadn't called when I ate dinner at a table set for two, talking to empty chairs. No, their love bloomed only when the money wilted. Regret is a heavy gift. I didn't accept delivery. They kept visiting, though. Kept bringing me little trinkets, warm hugs, and forced laughter. They acted as though nothing had happened, as though love alone could patch what greed had shattered. But I remained still, like the old oak tree in my front yard, weathered, unbending. I wasn't cruel. I offered them tea. I let them sit. I listened as they spoke of their busy lives, their children, their vacations, but I never brought up the money, the properties, the trust. I didn't need to. The silence between us said enough, a silence they couldn't fill with their flowers or their carefully chosen words. I had made my decisions, quietly, firmly, legally. My estate was no longer theirs to circle. My future was no longer their plan to control. And I finally understood, love that needs permission to steal isn't love at all. They thought time would wear me down. That loneliness would soften my spine. But I had learned, long ago, to live with empty spaces. And unlike them, I didn't fear my own company. Regret is a heavy gift. I didn't accept delivery. The house feels bigger now, not emptier, just lighter. The heavy air that once clung to every corner, filled with whispers and quiet betrayals, has lifted. I wake each morning to soft sunlight streaming through the curtains. The tea kettle whistles gently, and I sit by the window, watching the birds dart between the trees. No one hovers over me. No one asks what's mine. No one counts behind my back. I walk to town when the weather's kind. The shopkeepers still call me Mrs. Harris, with soft smiles and respectful nods. Some of them know what happened. Most don't. It doesn't matter. I carry my story quietly now, like a warm stone in my pocket, heavy once, but now smooth with time. One afternoon, I walked past the little jewelry store on Main Street, the same one I used to pass for years, always looking but never stepping inside. This time, I opened the door. The bell chimed sweetly, like a gentle invitation. The young woman behind the counter greeted me with a smile that wasn't rehearsed. "Looking for anything special today?" she asked. I paused, letting my fingers glide over the glass cases. The rings, the necklaces, the bracelets. So many sparkles. But I wasn't here to replace what was stolen. Those pieces carried weight I no longer wanted to hold. Number today was different. I chose a simple gold band. No diamonds. No rubies. Just a smooth, quiet circle. The woman slid it onto my finger, and I admired the way it caught the light. "Perfect," I whispered. It wasn't to fill a hole. It was to mark a beginning, a celebration, not of wealth, of freedom. I paid with my own card, my own name shining on the receipt. That anemone had once been pushed to the side, buried under others' plans. But now it stood on every document, every account, every deed. My name, my choices, my life. I don't host big family dinners anymore. The house is quieter, yes, but it's peaceful. I read my books. I bake my pies. Not for company, but because I enjoy the smell filling the kitchen. Sometimes, I send them to the women's shelter or the library staff. I hear their laughter when they open the packages, and that's enough. Freedom has no price tag. They taught me that. Not through love, but through loss. And in that loss, I found something steadier than gold or diamonds. I found myself again. The diamonds were gone, but I still sparkle.